The decade-long effort to replace Oahu's outdated and overcrowded jail continues. To date, the state has spent nearly $10 million in planning and design for a new prison. Opponents of the project argue that the state needs to focus on criminal justice reforms, while proponents argue that a modern solution is needed now for those already incarcerated. Should Oahu build a new jail? Tonight's live broadcast and live stream of Insights on PBS Hawaii start now.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Olena Hugh. For much of his tenure, Governor Ige has been trying to have a new jail built to replace the Oʻahu Community Correctional Center in Kalihi. Now, there is little argument that OCCC is outdated, overcrowded, and insufficient to deal with all the state's needs, but there is division concerning what to do about it. Now, some say a modern facility is needed, while others say the state needs to look at making significant criminal justice reforms before any construction on a new jail begins. Currently, the state is looking at building a new jail in Halawa. The updated facility would increase capacity and add services not currently available at OCCC. Should Oahu build a new jail? We look forward to your participation in tonight's show. You can email or call us with your questions. We also encourage you to get involved in the conversation over on our Facebook page. Now on to our guests. State Senator Clarence Nishihara is the chair of the Senate Committee on Public Safety, Intergovernmental, and Military Affairs. He serves Senate District 17, which covers Waipahu, Manana, Pearl City, and Pacific Palisades. Kat Brady is the coordinator of the Community Alliance on Prisons. She is a community justice advocate working to increase civic literacy and to bring the community's voice into public policy. In the past, Brady has been involved in writing criminal justice reform bills. Max Otani is the director of the State Department of Public Safety. Prior to his appointment, he served as a board member of the Paroling Authority and worked in various positions in the state's correction and judicial systems. And Mark Patterson is the chair of the Hawaii Correctional System's Oversight Commission. He is the current administrator of the Hawaii Youth Correctional Facility and has worked to increase rehabilitative services and shelters for at-risk and houseless communities. Thank you all for joining us live in studio tonight. I would like to begin our conversation with Mr. Otani. Tell us what the current status is of OCCC as it is right now.
Hi, good evening. Well, we started the planning process about 6 years ago, and right now we are looking to move into the design phase. So the design phase will be consisted of, for the state to be issuing a RFP, so it's a request for proposal, looking to see who's qualified out there that can design and actually plan the building of the new OCCC. And that's where we're at right now.
And Senator, what can you tell us about how OCCC currently is doing, and if you believe there's a need to create a new jail?
Well, I think anybody who's drives past the OCCC, you can see that it's a facility that needs repair and needs to be. But also, when they built the design for OCCC, they had a different concept of how they were going to build it. So if you look like it kind of resembles like a college campus and the kinds of buildings, how they have it laid out, but it's not efficiently it's not efficiently created, so that you have problems where in supervising inmates, how you protect and have more safety for not only the inmates, but for those that work there. But I think it's very little actually in terms of the public probably feeling about the need to maintain a jail. The question is, where would you build it? In this case, the governor wants to do it in Halawa, next to Halawa prison, and the costs that were to do that. But also, there are concerns about what is the design going to be, what kind of programs you're going to put into that place, and maybe the type of people that will be housed there maybe not all of them should be in prison. And I think that's where the debate comes from. And I think that's where Brady probably comes in on saying how we should do that.
And speaking of Kat, what are your thoughts about the proposal?
Well, OCCC is in horrible shape. It's overcrowded. It's really run down. And the state, in an overcrowded situation, the state says, we need more beds. And the community says, we need more justice. So we're at a stalemate because the state sees prisons and jails as buildings, and the community sees them as our family and friends. Our people are in there. So we have two different perspectives, and they have not really meshed. And currently, OCCC has over 1,000 people. It's designed for 628. The operating capacity is 954, and there's 1,004 people in there. It is shameful that we're doing that. And 45% of the population are pretrial, parole, and probation violators at $219 a day. We could be doing a lot of good things that would actually help people.
And Mr. Patterson, do you think that there is a solution to this?
Is there a solution? Well, from my perspective, the commission feels that there is a need for a new facility for just the operational stability and safety of the work environment and the environment that the offenders will live in. However, we got to remember that this represents just the issues that are on Oʻahu. Yeah, the same issues that are plaguing OCCC at this time are also on the Big Island, on Maui, and on Kauai. So we're really looking at this process now as a model to see that this is a state issue, and we're trying to replace the largest jail, but we also have 3 more jails that will follow, yeah, that are in almost, if not equal or worse conditions than OCCC. So we have to focus on that thought. So when you ask what is the solution, if there's no easy, readily solution that I can provide at this time, only more conversation. The structures are structures that are only as good as the system that we have planned for it to be part of. Mm-hmm. So the focus will always be on the system.
Mr. Otani, what would you say, when people do say that it's overcrowded, and obviously you are shipping inmates to the mainland, do we need to continue doing that?
Well, I think we're talking 2 separate issues now, because the jail population and the prison population are 2 distinct populations. Our jails are overcrowded, and all of our jails are overcrowded at this time. We as the Department of Public Safety, we have no choice but to take defendants that come our way to the jails. So we cannot control overcrowding in our jails. And I think that's one of the messages that, I want to put out is that, if they bring them to us with the proper documents, we're obligated to take them. And we have no mechanism to release our jail inmates back out into the community. It's basically a court's decision to get them out. On the prison side, right now, we do have over 1,000 inmates in Arizona, and Arizona is actually our safeguard for overcrowding in our prison situation. But I do agree with what Mark had just said, is that all of our jails on the neighbor islands also are in need of repairs and replacement.
And Senator, before lawmakers currently is a proposal that would release those with petty misdemeanors and whatnot to not be, locked up. What is your stance on this particular bill? Well,
there's a number of bills that were hoped to reduce the population by. One was no cash bail. That was one idea. I don't think that passed, but yes, there are others. It didn't pass.
It passed the House.
It did pass. Okay, passed the House. So that's correct. And there are other bills that look at perhaps really the courts are the ones that send people, to be incarcerated. And so they're looking at maybe in how they decide which ones are low-level misdemeanors, that perhaps they could not be there. They could be put out on either more on parole or looking at their sentencing. So those are things, I think there were those bills that were moving forward. But I think at the end of the day, I think I kind of agree with what Kat is saying. You know, we need to find a better way of how we decide to incarcerate people and who do we incarcerate, because not everybody needs to be in jail. So, and you can eliminate some of those that don't really need to be there and be on the outside, and you can be sure that they'll show up to their court cases and stuff like that, then perhaps the numbers that we actually have to incarcerate would drop. But will it be significantly enough of a drop? That I'm not sure.
I guess from the community standpoint, this is one of the biggest public works projects in Hawaii's history, and the community has been totally left out. So the planning and everything has been in a black box. So we have no idea what's actually happening. Some of the consultants go to the IAEA Neighborhood Board, and they make a mind-numbing report every month, and they think that's community. That they can check off the community box because they've talked to the IAEA Neighborhood Board. And yet, you know, everybody from Oahu knows people who are in OCCC. So this is, the community has a real stake in this, and we have been totally left out of the process. And that is the biggest bone of contention, because there are great ideas in the community, lots of amazing researchers in Hawaii, and yet they're just going ahead. We're going to build a big building. First, they wanted a 1,350-bed jail. It's like, what the heck are we talking about? So I think in order to do a real study, we need to find out who's in there, why, and for how long, and we need to engage the community. And that doesn't mean showing 3 posters and saying, okay, which one do you like? That's not community engagement.
And Mr. Patterson, in your experience working with other facilities as well, how do you improve the treatment and the conditions?
Community partnerships. When we look at each of the facilities in the system, you have the jails and then you have the prisons. Each of them are located somewhere along the public safety system of continuity while incarcerated. Yeah. While they're incarcerated, it's bringing in the service providers and the community supporters, faith-based organizations, substance abuse, mental health, to help with the programming while in the facilities. That's why it's important to really understand what we're going to do with a new jail and what is their role going to be in the larger system, and how effective can they be. Yeah. Public safety, unfortunately, when you look at the major state systems, they get left with what I prefer to call unsuccessful interventions, from mental health, homelessness, and just judiciary not having any other answer rather than to just lock up. Yeah. And so they're stuck with all these bodies not really having the ability to navigate because interventions have already failed. And so they're the last resort, and it's easy to put them in the jail so that the other agencies can forget about them. You know, so where are the agencies now in talking about this prison? And why aren't they part of the decision making in assisting public safety and making these decisions? Because a lot of their programs, these individuals came from before they committed their first crime. Yeah, so we also think of that as that's system reform, bringing in all the players to have a full understanding of who's going into the jail and how we can have alternative to the incarceration.
We're getting questions from our viewers already, and I have a nice stack here. But before we get to that, I did want to have Mr. Otani clarify the difference between a jail and a prison for our viewers that might not know.
Okay. Basically, a jail is someone that is being detained there as a pretrial defendant, so prior to conviction, or he's serving a misdemeanor sentence. Prisons are normally, they're remanded to the custody of the Department of Public Safety, and normally it's for longer terms. Usually it's 5 years and above.
Thank you. All right, Kat and Max, you've been addressed by Bob from Waialainui, and he says, what did the 2019 Prison Reform Task Force say about the new jail, and what's their position on it?
They basically said that we don't need a huge facility. We should actually look at who should be in jail or who might be in jail, and scale it down to something that's more reasonable, more manageable, and has room for programs. Because it's really difficult when you're in prison, in your jail, actually, and there's not a lot of programs going on. And I think that is really, and I understand why, because people are serving anywhere from a week to a month to several months to a year in jail. So it is very difficult to program, but there are so many people in the community, retired teachers, who want to go in and really help, because our reading level in jail is like 5th or 6th grade. So we need people to go in to teach them so that when they come out, when people come out, they actually can function in the community. It's really difficult if you can't read.
Are there facilities in other places in the world that have some kind of intermediary place where it is somewhat of a rehabilitation and not designated as a jail?
Well, in Atlanta, they have something instead of jail that's called an equity center. And it's where people who would be sentenced to jail go in, they can bring their families. It's about services. It's about providing the services that people need. And that's what we need to do.
All right, we have another question. What would the cost difference be if it was built with a traditional procurement process versus a public-private partnership?
I think at this time we would not know. I think the RFP portion would flush that out, so we would have a good comparison as to what would be the best funding method for that. So I think that question will come at the next phase, on the design phase at this point.
And this is something that Governor Ige is entertaining, right?
He is, yes, he's looking at it. And as Kat said, it is a very expensive project. So, to have state put all their bonds into one project like this would be very costly for the state.
Can you take me through the process of how something like this is executed? It doesn't seem that there was some kind of community aspect. It's just something that the governor's trying to get done.
I think they had community meetings. This was before my time.
One meeting.
Well, they had, as I said, this was before my time. And, they had one, I believe, at Aloha Stadium, at the conference rooms there. Our consultants and members of our department have been attending the neighborhood board and the community association meetings on a regular basis. We've done population forecasts. We had consultants come in and look at, what the forecast would be in 2024 up until 2032, and it's pretty consistent that the bed jails, OCCC beds would be, in the 1,000. It'll drop probably by 2032 if pretrial bail reforms would be, but it would still be about a little higher than the population that we have today at OCCC. This new facility also is taking into consideration the need for pretrial bed release. So it's what I like to call transitional community placement. So it'll give more resources to put people out on furlough. So, eventually right now, the population that has the opportunity to furlough is the prison population. But ideally, this could also be used for the misdemeanor population and the jail population to enhance their success. But we've done, an extensive study, and, it measures length of time. So the overcrowding has a bunch of issues. It's the amount of people coming in and how long they stay, and then what happens to them after that. So study takes into consideration all these things, and this is how the forecast was eventually came out.
And Senator, what do you think are the most pressing issues regarding OCCC currently?
Well, right now, I guess the biggest concern is, regardless of what size of the jail we build, where would we fund it? And I think there was talk about doing a public-private partnership, but there was a bill that says we're not going to engage with a public-private partnerships in the state to build a jail. Well, you take that off the table, then you have to look at, it's going to come from general funds. And if that's the case, the what started out at $525 million is now projected, if we do something like that, would be $1 billion. Mm-hmm. And now there's no way that this community, or I can't think of any other community, would allow taking $1 billion of taxpayer money to build a jail. And it's always a question whether or not, that's why I think we're looking at alternatives to that. You can lower the number of people actually have to be incarcerated. There's always going to be some. But how do we size it downward and make it still safe for the community that we have people on the streets? Part of the problem also is that, and I've mentioned to other people, that when you have such a high recidivism rate where people get sent back to prison, that it doesn't look all that positive when you have up to 40% of the people that are, have gone through the system are returning as to be incarcerated. I said, this is kind of like you have a high school where 40% of the seniors are coming back to start all over in school. I think the school couldn't function, and neither can the jails. I think we got to do something about that. And I think that's why I think having community involvement to look at that, how you can prevent people from recidivizing back into the jail system. I think it involves providing for families to be able to engage with those that are in prison, because the better that they're engaged with their families, less likely that they'll be coming back into prison. And so, I took a trip to Saguaro, Arizona, and that was about the latter part of February. There were other members of public safety, which included the Vice Chair, Lynn DeCoit, and we also had
Gil
Revere, right, another senator. He was all part of the Public Safety Committee. And then we had the public safety chairs from the House. There was Representative Takashi Ono and...
what did you see while you were there?
Yeah, well, it was interesting because...
Did you only see the inmates from Hawaii?
Well, there were over 1,000 of them in there. They were all in pods. Mm. And so we got to visit. They allowed us to go and they let us see what they're doing. And it was interesting because we talk about programs, but they do have programs there. And there was a program that where they were training people to write Braille. I was kind of surprised at that. So he had these inmates who knew absolutely nothing about Braille, and they were in the process of learning how to write Braille. They could translate it. They could do all these things. And they aren't that many Braille writers, I can tell you right now, on the outside. So what these people were able to do was just terrific. And also, they also had programs such as how to be a good father, which I thought was wonderful. And I sat and talked to some of them. And because these programs were voluntary, that everybody sitting in there had to have wanted to be there. And so I thought that, that was a good program, because if it helps to make them better people and how connect with their families, then this is a good program.
So would that mean that you're advocating for sending the inmates to the mainland? Or just that you appreciated
No, I
what's
appreciate
happening?
the programs they do have. And interesting enough, most of the inmates there would probably say they feel better treated there. And when you look at the facilities, they're newer, they're better, better.
Interesting perspective.
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
I'd like to bring up a point, And so for non-professionals in corrections, there is a big difference between prison and jail.
Yeah.
Yeah. So our conversation tonight is about a jail. And when we look at the population within the jail, it's a very transitional population, right? People are bailing out 24 hours a day. Yeah. At the end of the workday, whatever's in the police cell block is taken to OCCC and they're taken into the facility. Now, these people are pre-trial. They're not convicted yet. That's why we say they're transitional. So the period of time is usually less than a year. But we know, because of the way the judicial system works, some people can wait a long time for their court. Yeah. The arraignment is probably the first thing. And at the arraignment, it determines whether they're going to stay or they can leave. And if there's a dollar amount, that's going to determine that. So we're really looking at a specific type of population, that's transitional. And so we're asking ourselves, we're going to build this $550 million jail that's going to have people that come in and go out daily. Yeah. And where is the thought process and how do we manage that? Yeah. Because this is not long-term. What the senator is referring to is long-term. They're going to be in there for more than a year. So if we're sending them to the mainland, they're looking at 5-10-year sentences. So you have multiple programs to keep them and sustain them during their incarceration and prepare them to return home. The jail is a short period. Yeah. When we talk about high numbers, we have to understand that individuals are leaving, individuals are coming daily. Yeah. So how do we deal with that population? And what is the planning and thought going into that? That's why I continually refer to the systems. Yeah. And understanding who's going into them and how do we divert. Yeah. Because some of them, we're not going to say they're innocent. We're just saying we don't think incarceration is where they need to be. They can still maintain their family, go to their jobs, work, maintain, and still be held accountable and go to court. Yes. But not from an incarcerated point of foundation.
I want to say something about public-private partnerships. And I think they are an assault on democracy, because you make a contract with a private entity, and then whatever that contract is, the legislature, the community, nobody has any say because the contract is there. And that is a huge problem. And there has been lots of information about public-private partnerships and how the community has ended up holding the bag on many of these things, because CCA, which is now Core Civic, is notorious for building stuff and then running out of money and leaving a shell that the community is invested in, and it's unusable. So we have to be really, really cautious about who we do business with.
I think I agree with Mark. There's a difference between the programs that we provide in jails and prisons, but nonetheless, we need to provide programs in jails.
Yes.
So some of the jails programs, medical, mental health, detox, these are things that people coming off the street, they're required. A lot of them are in bad shape when they come to our jails. So these are programs that we need. We need to start engaging them, not in long-term treatment, but engaging them in some form of treatment, at least thinking about, yeah, I do have a problem. Maybe I'm not convicted yet, but if I can address this problem, then, might help me in my life. So I think these are the types of short-term treatment programs that we can afford and apply in jail settings. And we still need a jail to provide those services. And
Well, we have many questions. I'm going to start with a comment from Anonymous on Oʻahu. Yes, we need more jails, and the longer we wait, the higher the price will be. The judges need to work to place people in diversion programs to lower capacity. You're not going to reduce the number of inmates by reducing the number of cells. We also have a question here from Chaz that says there are not sufficient amounts of areas where people can come and be counseled or help with vocational development, and there are none of those kinds of activities at OCCC. What will be available alternatives and opportunities for our people in jail to be given? I think you spoke about it a little bit.
Yeah, so right now the jails, again, they're not adequate for what is expected of the Department of Public Safety. So we need program space, we need, private time rooms, we need all of these things which currently is not available in our old facility. And I think, in having this, in building a new facility, we can afford this to the inmates, and, hopefully they don't come back. That's the whole idea, is that we provide them services so they don't come back.
But having 1,000 people at OCCC is shameful. And a lot of the people are coming off the street, people who are living unsheltered. And we are giving them the most unaffordable housing. Jail, $219 a day. So when we talk about that number of people, why isn't the next sentence, why aren't we doing something to reduce the population? And why are we planning for things as they are now with no reform? The department hired a consulting firm, Pulitzer, and they said that if bail reform happened right now, it was last session, they said, you could save 200 beds. So we know, and that's Menini, there are many things that we could be doing to divert people to actually help them be successful in their lives.
Mm-hmm. And anonymous viewer also said, instead of more jails, why not revamp the penal system? Yeah. What's the average amount of time that someone's spending at OCCC?
It all depends on their status. If they're coming in pretrial status, and and a lot of them will spend, I don't have the exact number with me, but the numbers are going up.
Okay.
So duration of time is long.
And Senator, not sure if you're familiar with this, but it's a suggestion. Have you ever considered building the jail in the outer islands? Perhaps there's more land available and it would be cheaper.
Well, they already have jails in the neighbor islands already, so I'm not sure how it would go down if you took build a facility sort of like OCCC on the neighbor island. I think you get pushback from the community.
The jails serve the county.
Yeah. So technically, logistically, it wouldn't work because they would still need to go to court into the circuit that they're arrested in. So if we build it on the Big Island, we would have to fly them back here for Oahu for every court appearance.
Yeah, that could be pretty costly.
Very costly.
So maybe not as cheap as assumed. Paul wrote in to say, what's the relationship between limited housing opportunity and crimes incurred by those seeking and returning to the only stable shelter that they know?
Big connection. That's a huge problem. And I think when people are desperate, and we have to understand that the reason we're in this situation is because of the policies we have. We have really punitive policies. Like, we have so many people on probation, and Hawaii has the longest probation in the country, 59 months. What are we doing? I mean, anybody who is under surveillance for that amount of time is going to screw up somehow because it's just human. And we're not thoughtful about what we're doing. And I want the government to be thoughtful about the money that people work really hard to earn and pay their taxes. And that's what's being used. So we want accountability from the government. We want information about who's in there and why, and other alternatives. Many jurisdictions have actually done bail reform and diversion. And in Illinois, they passed a massive bail reform, And they're going through a whole year of studying to make sure that bail reform is connected with mass incarceration. And that's a dirty phrase in Hawaii. People don't like to talk about mass incarceration, but when you look at our system, you know what's going on.
When we talk about recidivism, we talk about coming back to to jail or to incarceration. We need to understand the definition, and Max can share if I'm wrong. It's usually, you're discharged from the system, and then so many years after, you commit a new crime. If you're committing a new crime, you're going back to the jail. So that's one pathway of recidivism. The other recidivism, you're on parole and you do a violation and you go back to the prison. So I don't know if I never saw a report that showed the difference in how many in each one are coming back.
A lot.
So we have to be cautious on how we look at those numbers or look at what is being said on whether or not it's more coming back to the prison or more coming back to the jail.
Good point.
Yeah,
Jail means new crime.
we have recidivism studies that are put out by the Interagency Council on Intermediate Sanctions, and I would like to say that the Paroling Authority has done a good job in reducing recidivism for inmates that are released. There's also a significant drop in inmates that have completed their full term and released into the community. And if we could replicate that for the jail population in some form, I think the department could make a substantial dent in recidivism. But again, we need the resources to do this.
We have a comment from Mark. The public would really like to see an audit of the halfway drug rehab units demanded by the parole board. There's a real abuse by those entrusted by parolees' success. It's inane to not allow nonviolent offenders to be allowed to go to a safe home environment. What are your thoughts about that, Senator?
Well, I know they have programs. Again, do they have enough financial resources to have more of them? And, there was I know in my neighborhood, there's a house that is clean and sober, and it's a pretty quiet place. They're not creating any problems at all. But I think there need to be more programs like that, and to the extent that you got to have people handle how you get them off of drugs, that's important. And you got to provide them safe housing, because that's another problem. People come out and they have no place to go, and before you know it, they're committing some kind of crime. And I think it's more a crime because they're in poverty, and then they end up back in prison again. So I think there's a number of different areas where the society has to look at and say what's really important. Do we help some of these people so that they don't go into jail, back to jail? That will certainly help these individuals. And what we don't seem to understand is that these are people that are in our neighborhoods, and you might not know that they were in prison, but being in prison creates a special kind of mark on you in society that makes it kind of difficult for some of them to get a job. The unions have been pretty good about hiring people who have been formerly in prison, which is, I think, a good plus for the unions to do that.
Mr. Otani, there's been discussion about this new possible facility, the location, if you could kind of expand on that, and also what it would offer that OCCC doesn't have now.
Okay, the new facility would be located in Halawa Valley. It's currently where the agriculture quarantine station is right now. So what the project does is it allows the Department of Agriculture to build a new, smaller quarantine station, and then they would level out the current one, and then we would build the facility there. The facility there would, again, would provide adequate housing, more than adequate housing. It would provide safe housing for all inmates. We would have enough beds, as Kat was saying earlier, you know, the population at OCCC, we're over capacity. So basically what that means is somebody's on the floor at this point. So providing, you know, adequate bed space for the inmates, providing adequate care for the inmates, and providing a safe environment for the inmates plus the staff that work there. I think that's one of the positive things that would, basic positive things that would come out of this project.
Kat, what are your thoughts about overcrowding at OCCC, and what do they do currently?
Well, you know, alternatives to incarceration have been in statute since the 80s, and we don't really do it. That's one of the problems. We don't really focus on diverting people. So we have people who are really living on the margins of society, and they can't do for themselves. So we put them in jail, you know, in an overcrowded jail. What does that do? It doesn't really help. It doesn't solve that problem. It doesn't help that person. There are things that we could do. You know, when we look at other jurisdictions like Chicago, they have like 100,000 people in jail. I mean, we have relatively small population, 4,000 people, you know, incarcerated. There are things that we could do. There is so much research coming out that shows that incarceration only increases criminality. Why do we want to do that? Why don't we want to put people into programs that are positive, that can give them a leg up so that they'll be successful in the community? But instead, it seems like we program people for failure, and it's working. We have really done well on recidivism, and now we've got to turn that around and say, how do we keep people out of jail? How do we help our families thrive? And understand that every person who's incarcerated is somebody's son or daughter or mom or dad or auntie or uncle. They're related to us. They're our family. It's not those people, it's our people.
You're nodding your head.
I've heard Kat before. It's really understanding who's getting incarcerated, you know, and looking at from a systems perspective what has been done that has worked. And so if real quick, you know, I always uplift the juvenile system at this particular point in time when you look at it as a model. When they started building the new jail, 30-bed in Kapolei, it was the same time they started reform. Yeah, and so by the time the jail was completed, maybe 5 years later, the reform had already reduced the population by half. Okay, and then 10 years later, the jail often goes, well, the prison is already down 83%. Yeah, at times the jail has zero population. Yeah.
On the youth side.
On the youth side. So the judges have done a great job on trying to keep the kids out of prison, out of jails. Yeah. And what they've done, working with CAMD, Child and Adolescents Mental Health, working with Child Welfare Services and Family Court and the Office of Youth Service guiding them, yeah, created a diversionary alternative to incarceration by adding all of their service providers to a continuity system of care.
Yes.
Yeah, so that the judges are sending them to programs throughout the state and even out of state, unfortunately, but we're working on that situation. But it has caused a decrease in the incarceration. Now that's just a model. Yeah, everybody's gonna tell you, well, that's just kids, right? No. But what you wanna look at is, this is cooperation at a high level between the departments on how to solve problems. Yeah, and that they will be able to create a reduction in the incarcerated population. So how do we do that on a bigger scale with the men? Yeah.
Perhaps there should be some kind of planning committee or something where all of you guys are included and a part of this project, and then also reach out to the community.
Well, like when Kawailoa was the former youth facility, when they were planning on what to do, they actually engaged lots of people in the community as well as agencies. So it wasn't just one entity trying to figure out what to do. They realized that the kids who are there are their family. So it became really personal. And I think when people start to feel that personal thing, then they're really engaged. And we need to really broaden this discussion. There is so much information out there and so much emerging as we speak that by the time whatever they're trying to do is done, it'll be obsolete and it'll be full. If we don't change anything, they'll build something big, they'll fill it up, and then we'll be in the same problem. This is what Hawaii does.
There's a way to work both. I think, similar to the juvenile system, if we continue to build and work on pretrial reforms, I think, there's a way that we could scale back the population. The facility that we're building is scalable also. It's not just all hard bids. We could transition some of these bids into community transition type bids, which would serve the population in getting them out on furlough. So it's, for me, I see this as two separate entities. There is a definite need to build to replace. And all of us here in this discussion honestly believes that the current OCCC needs to be replaced. It's beyond repair. It's beyond renovating. It just needs to be replaced. We can also do pretrial bail reform and criminal justice reform at the same time, and two could run simultaneously. And where it intersects, then that's the benefit, I think, at this point.
All right,
but it doesn't. That's the problem.
We have more comments. Tom from Facebook says, and not Tom, the creator of Facebook, government policies are making the prison industrial complex profitable at the cost of the community. We also have another comment from David in Honolulu saying, since we're sending about 1,000 prisoners to Arizona a year, we must need some form of jail facility. Why is it that the government is going to refund $200 million to the taxpayers when that could be used for the new jail instead? Gig from Makakilo says, instead of spending money on prisons, why don't we spend more money on schools to help kids who are dealing with learning disabilities? So I think there's a little bit of a misconception about the inmates in Arizona and then the inmates here at OCCC.
Right.
So, but thank you for participating in the conversation. Senator, what can constituents do at this point?
Well, I think they need to get involved in the discussion of how we look at prisons, or how we look at jails, and how we incarcerate. I think we need to have a discussion on that so we can better get to the point where we can decide that who should be incarcerated, and there's always going to be some, but who shouldn't be, because we need to help. When people get into prison, they lose contact with their families. So how do we do a better job of having services to families themselves? And when you look at those who are incarcerated, you find they're also intergenerational. It's the parents, fathers or mothers have been in prison before, now their kids are, and then in some cases you're working out to the grandkids and now heading to prison. So I think there's something definitely wrong with a system that we can't seem to break that cycle. So I think having maybe more heads that are brought to look at this and see how can we achieve what we need to make a more humane society that we have, that maybe we might be able to get to where we need to be. And I think we need more people involved in it, not just people in public safety, but I think it's also, we need to have the other agencies involved, like I think what they've done. I think we need to have more of that.
Mr. Patterson, what are your thoughts about the bill before the legislature now that would release those that have petty misdemeanors and whatnot instead of putting them in OCCC?
We support that effort. you know, as far as the commission. It's really understanding why we want to put them in there, yeah, and why would we want them to have not go inside. When we look at the crimes and the profile of this individual going into the jail, everybody talks about public safety, you know. What we really want to know about is what led to the crime. And at that point, do the assessments, which are being done, do the intake and say, do we really need him to have to be in the prison? And where can we divert him while he awaits his court hearings? Yeah, that's the big question. Yeah, it's not saying that we shouldn't hold him accountable for his crime, but do we need to hold him in the jail?
Is there like a method to have them under house arrest or something?
That's more of a max question. Probation does allow for, ankle monitoring. I don't know if that's... Yeah, and in our pretrial services, we do ankle monitoring. The problem is some of these people don't have a house to go to. Yeah. And again, we're all for pretrial reform, but if you're going to divert somebody, you need to make sure that there's the resources out in the community. Yes. Because they become a public safety risk if you just divert them and expect them to behave and receive no services. So it's very important that resources are available if any type of diversion is going to be done. Whenever you hear diversion or alternative, it comes with a system in place.
Yes.
Comes with service providers. It comes with volunteers and organizations that are willing to take a body, provide treatment, provide residential housing, and some of that is state agencies who have the resources to have service providers who provide that. Yes. But if they don't have the resources, then they can't get the service providers. Yeah, but that's technically what reform is. Mm-hmm. Really, truly understanding what's coming into the facility and whether or not they can be diverted. And if they can be diverted, do we have the resources to manage them externally?
And
right, diversion is a whole other system.
Yep.
And that's what we need to create, a real system of diversion. I was in a meeting recently and there were several retired judges in it, and they said in the meeting, wow, everything's a felony. All these things, when I was on the bench, they were just citations, and now they're felonies. Why are we felonizing everything? And I think that is a really good question. Why are we making everything a felony? And several years ago, they made if you have 3 misdemeanors, that's a felony. So what are we doing? Why aren't we actually looking at our community, seeing what we need, and providing those services, rather than waiting until people are so desperate that they do something where they end up in jail? Why are we doing that? I don't know.
So, Mr. Otani, while this is in a state of flux and nothing's actually happened, there's no groundbreaking or anything, what's the hardest part of your job right now?
Well, we've just cleared out the prisons of COVID. All of our facilities, our inmates and staff are clear of COVID. That was not a very easy feat. That took up a lot of resources. It caused inmates to be very uncomfortable. On a positive note, I spent some time at Halawa yesterday talking to a class. We have a Pell Grant with Chaminade, and we have a bunch of inmates that signed up, and it's a 2-year course for associate's degree. And we started off with about 16. I think we're down to about 10 or 12 right now, but they're very positive. It's things like this that kind of keeps me going. And because of this group, it was recommended that we branch off into possibly Arizona. So, we're looking at possibly expanding this service to Arizona right now and providing college courses under the Pell. So.
Well, thank each and every one of you for joining us tonight and sharing your insight and your expertise. And it was a lively conversation, so we really appreciate you being here. And so thank you so much, first and foremost, to State Senator Clarence Nishihara, and also Max Otani, the Director of the State Department of Public Safety, Kat Brady, Coordinator for the Community Alliance on Prisons, and Mark Patterson, Chair of the Hawaii Correctional Systems Oversight Commission.
Thank you.
It's great to see you guys in person as well. Next week on Insights, corruption charges against government officials have shaken the state in recent years. The legislature recently formed the commission to increase standards of conduct that aim to combat corruption and improve government transparency. Now, can the state weed out government corruption and regain the public's trust? Join us and participate in that conversation. That's next week. For Insights on PBS Hawaii, I'm Olena Hugh. Aloha and a hui hou.